Hi there, guys. It's Mrs. Chappie, and welcome to our very last U.S. history class of this semester. We are finishing. I wish we were finishing in person, but I'm looking forward to seeing most of you guys on Thursday when we have our Zoom class. This is going to kind of wrap up the last topic that we're going to talk about. We've covered a lot through this whole year. We started way back with the first colonization, and then we moved through the development of the colonies, and then with the War of Independence, and then we saw how the United States spread out west, and we saw the development of the different regions within the United States and how they were all distinct and unique. From there, we went into the Civil War, where we saw how those differences in the regions created differences in the way the states were doing things. And that led to the Civil War. After the Civil War, we came out and talked really shortly about how we had this period of Reconstruction where the South was brought back in. That's what we talked about last week, how the South was brought back into the Union. But continued to have problems left over from their legacy of slavery, and how there were all kinds of struggles with civil rights and treating former slaves, which were referred to as freedmen, equally. And so amending the Constitution, we talked about that last week. And so we're going to move on to our last lecture today, where we're going to talk about a second industrial revolution, a second change in the way the United States is living, making money, the way that their industry works. So if you remember, we talked about the period after the American Revolution. We talked about that period where there was a big shift, particularly up north, and that big shift came about from the way things were made. Originally, stuff was pretty much handmade in what was called cottage industries, where people made everything they needed at home. There weren't factories, things weren't mass produced, there weren't interchangeable parts, and everything was done pretty much at a small local level, often in their own homes. We talked about that first industrial revolution that happened. I always use round numbers. You guys know I'm not good with names or numbers. I don't like names and numbers. I like ideas and concepts and how they fit together. So I find it easiest to remember things roundly. So I would say that happened about the 1800s. Historians will give different dates and what particularly happened. Usually the touch point in that is when a guy, Lau, went over to England and he saw how they were making stuff with factories. He copied some of their ideas. We talked about this. Do you guys remember earlier where we talked about factories were built on next to rivers with wheels to provide power? This is before they had coal, steam engines, and before electricity. So historians will kind of say that's the beginning of this first industrial revolution, but using the number around the 1800s is a good kind of easy way to remember it. It was after the American Revolution. Well, then we go after this industrial revolution that created interchangeable parts. People like Eli Whitney, you guys know this. This is where he came up with the parts that interchanged and be able to make more guns rapidly. That contributed to the Civil War, or it changed the way the war was fought because they had interchangeable parts. And so that takes place in the mid 1800s. We come out of the Civil War. We're pushing towards about 1900. Look how fast we're going through time, like 100 years, like that. And so now we're looking about the 1900s, and there's going to be another change in the way things are done, another industrial revolution. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I was thinking about that just as I was thinking, what are we going to talk about? And that made me think, gosh, so we had the 1800s, this change from handmade goods to machine-made goods, which is what we call the Industrial Revolution. The 1900s, where we have this further change and this explosion of inventions, the light bulb, the telephone, all of those things that happen. around the 1900s. And then we jump ahead another 100 years to the 2000s, and look at what we're doing with all these computers and Zoom classes and everything like that. So it kind of hit me as like, wow, it's like every 100 years you can go, look at the change, look at the change, look at the change. You guys, it's kind of cool. Okay, I'm getting a little too excited. I'll calm my little self down. So here we go, sharing our screen. Looking at this, I can't wait. I haven't seen yet Mr. Betts' video, but I will find, I'm sure he has one on the Industrial Revolution, and I will link it for you because I'll be curious if he's talking about the same stuff I am. We tend to usually talk about the same stuff, but I haven't watched his yet. So the first thing I want to do is kind of give you a flyby and overview of some terms that deal with this rise of industry, that lead to these inventions, and then just kind of touch on some inventors. Now, I'm sure you've heard of most of them. You guys are smart kids. You're like, oh yeah, I know Bell invented the telephone. Okay, Edison invented the light bulb. I've heard that. But I'm putting it kind of in this story of US history. So now you see where it fits in the timetable. You're like, oh, so this happened after the Civil War, Mrs. Chappie. I get it. So that is my hope for you guys, that you're kind of seeing how everything fits together. I like to look at the big picture, and so that's the point of this. So I don't expect you to memorize all these terms or to, know all this, but I want you to at least have heard them, because I wouldn't be doing a good job as a history teacher if I didn't at least talk to you a little bit about it. So industrialization. This is making products through the use of machinery. When we talk about the Industrial Revolution that we talked about before, that's when you went from making products, making things through machines instead of handmade. So we went from handmade to machines, and then anytime we talk about industrialization, we're talking about that idea of using machines to make things. And that's the world we live in now. Most everything is made by machines, although it's quite fascinating to think that now many states, many counties, many places, businesses require people to wear masks to enter them or to go outside, but they want all the masks to be handmade. So total opposite of industrialization, I guess, because people can make them at home really quick. I saw some cool pictures of Mrs. Hindmarsh making all kinds of masks. So that's the word I wanted to point out to you guys, industrialization. And here, I love this old picture because we see all of these factories, all these machines inside those factories. One of the problems, those of you, Tyco, I'm thinking of Tyco. Tyco's thinking this is a huge problem because look at all the pollution, look at all the stuff that's happening there. So with every change, there's always positive and negative. And when we meet on Thursday, that's what our focus is going to be on, critically thinking about those positive and negatives. So we can see pollution starting to come. We still, of course, see all the major cities along a waterway. We've talked about that throughout the year because of, yeah, you guys just all said trade. I know you guys all said that. The next term I want you to hear, this one may not be one you're as familiar with, entrepreneur. It is someone who starts a business and makes money, someone who comes up with a new idea. You can think of some people who have started amazing businesses and made tons of money because they're entrepreneurs. Think of Mark Zuckerberg. He's the guy who started Facebook. Or Amazon, Jeff Bezos started Amazon. Or Apple, who Steve Jobs started Apple, came up with Apple Computer. Bill Gates, Microsoft. So those are all entrepreneurs, and that's the term. There's actually a class that we're thinking about offering next year, depends on how the schedule comes out, but it's called the Young Entrepreneur, and it's all teaching students what goes into starting a business. And then you create your own pretend business, and then you present it to a pretend panel like the Sharks. There's a television show called Shark Tank that's full of entrepreneurs. They're coming up with ideas for businesses and they're telling people about it. It's like, oh, I have a business and I'm going to make a hammock because I think people need hammocks or whatever it might be. So another term that has to do with this rise of industry through the industrial world is called laissez-faire. And I almost left this off. I'm like, you guys probably don't want to learn French. But then I thought of some of my students, my students who are in 8th grade, James, Shelby, Charlotte. I have, Mia, who's in 9th grade. I have students who really should be familiar with what this word is, so I threw it in. You younger students are going, like Sarah's going, I don't want to learn French. You don't have to learn French, just kind of listen to it. The word is laissez-faire, and it means to leave alone or keep hands off. And that's the idea that people and economies, because remember, economy is how the way that money is made, work best if the government doesn't interfere with it. If you don't have a lot of rules and regulations and telling people how to do stuff. Through this COVID pandemic, we've seen that it was hard for businesses to get things done, to come up with tests, to do different things like that because of all the government rules and regulations. So one of the first things our government did is right away say, okay, we're going to suspend this rule. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to let private hospitals and industries do it to try and make things go faster. So I'm looking forward to talking with some of you guys about this on Thursday and how we've seen it play out in our current COVID world that we're living in. The next idea that I want to talk about real quick is the idea of mass productions or assembly lines. It's using interchangeable parts to make large quantities of the exact same good. We've talked about this when we talked about in the Civil War how they were able to produce large quantities of guns, or the cotton gin with interchangeable parts, but it goes to anything. I'm looking in my office, so I go, what do I have right here? I have, whoops, I picked up this. I have a mouse. Every single mouse, as I'm throwing the mouse around, it's doing all kinds of crazy things to the screen. That's really weird. Okay. Every mouse is made exactly the same. I have a pen. This pen came off of an assembly line where it's made, every pen is made exactly the same. It has all the parts, a little clicker part, a little part to put on your, I don't know, this is supposed to go in your shirt to hold it up. The part where you can see through and see how much ink you have. They're all going to be exactly the same. I'm just grabbing what's on my desk right here. A candle. This is my very favorite candle. Oh, I wish you could smell it. It's amazing. It is a Capri Blue called Volcano. Anyways, the point being is this lid is exactly the same and is going to fit on this jar. Every lid has the exact same jar. They're mass produced. You can go buy this candle on Amazon. You can go buy it in a store. You could buy it in a boutique. It's sold all over the place. And so that's what mass production means. It means you're using an assembly line to make a whole bunch of the same thing. They're all identical and they all have interchangeable parts. This lid could fit on any one of the candles. In fact, the company that made this jar probably made it in all different kinds of colors for all different types of smells. This one is, like I said, oh, it smells so good, is Capri Sun Volcano, but it was probably, you know, made for a candle that smells like strawberries because it's all going to be interchangeable so that you can do all different types of candles inside of it. So all of these are terms that kind of relate to this point in history that is what we would be talking about. Now, I'm going to talk real quick about what a corporation is because I want to have this flashback moment with you guys. Do you remember when we were first talking about Jamestown and we talked about joint stock companies and we talked about that there would be companies that would try to get people to come over and settle in the colony. And they would say, hey, you know, come to our colony and you can explore, and if you can't find a certain amount of gold, you get to keep it and you give the rest back to the company. And I said that these were the beginnings of kind of what we call corporations today. It's where you share the risk. Do you guys remember we did the little acting it out in class? I hope you remember this and that I just didn't do it for nothing. But we acted it out that we had an investor and they got a ship, and then they got their crew and the ship went off to the New World and it sank. And then the investor who bought the ship lost all their money because they put all their money into one ship. And how we found that if you got 10 investors and they put money into a ship and the ship sank, they only lost a part of their money, and then they could put money into another ship and hopefully that ship would make it to the New World. That was kind of illustrating that idea of something called a joint stock company. Well, that's basically what a corporation is. It's where a business is owned by a whole bunch of investors. And we could look at companies like Apple that makes iPhones. A whole bunch of people put money into that. And right now, they're not making a lot of phones, but one person isn't going to go bankrupt. The investors are all going to lose a little bit of money when Apple is worth less money because they're not able to get their parts from China right now. I hope that kind of makes sense. The people that put money into these companies are called investors. They buy stock in that. They own a portion of it, but it's a way of distributing the risk, and then it also distributes the reward. So one person doesn't make all the money from it, different people do. So that's taking that idea that we started our very first semester and showing now we're at a time in history where corporations start to develop. As more businesses start to grow, they start creating this corporate model as entrepreneurs come up with ideas. Okay, so those were just some of our basic terms when we talk about the rise of industry, this new age. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different inventions. And when we meet on Thursday, we're going to talk about the good and the, the good and the bad from these various inventions. So the first one, a dishwashing machine. I'd ask you guys, if you were with me right now, how many of you can raise your hand and tell me that you have a dishwasher in your kitchen? Most people today in America have dishwashers, not everyone. The dishwashing machine was invented by a woman. I love it when we have great, strong women who do our inventions, because women have contributed a lot over time to our country and to different things that have happened. And this is an illustration of this dishwashing machine. You would put the dishes kind of in a rack and they would stand up. And Josephine Cochrane came up with this idea. Here is Josephine. I'll come over on the side with you. Hi, Josephine. She was a wife of a politician in Illinois, and she used to give a lot of dinner parties. And she discovered that even though she had servants to wash her dishes, she didn't have to wash them herself. But the dishes would often get cracked or chipped or broken, and it made her crazy. So she says, if nobody else is going to invent a dishwashing machine, I will do it myself. And go figure, she did it. And it worked. And she had less breakage, and she had this great machine. So, you know who bought most of those machines? Hotels and restaurants. Hotels and restaurants, they again had employees who could wash the dishes, but a lot of dishes broke. And this machine stopped that from happening. In fact, this machine was so exciting and so different. It won the highest award at the World's Fair in Chicago. There was a World's Fairs used to be a big deal, particularly before the internet, and people would want to show off what they had invented or had discovered or had gone and seen, as the case may be in England. When they had a World's Fair there, England brought things back from all of the British Empire to show off. Look what I got from Australia. Look what I got from Africa. Look what I got from, Africa. Yeah, I said Africa already, but different places that the British had colonies, they would show it off at the World's Fair. The steam engine was first shown at the World's Fair. The Eiffel Tower was built for the World's Fair. Anyways, World's Fairs used to be a huge, huge deal. and her washing machine won the highest award at the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. Oh, fun fact, the California State Fair, which is like a smaller version of the World's Fair, it's been held 166 times. Not every single year. It was canceled during World War II, was canceled this week because of the pandemic. So our California State Fair is not happening this year, has not been canceled since World War II. Useless fact. So here is a kind of showing you how that dishwashing machine would work. You see all those dishes standing up in there. I read a little bit about it. Apparently it kind of spins around. If you look inside your dishwasher today, your dishwasher has an arm that has water that squirts out it, and the arm spins around. Our dishes don't move. It's my understanding that the original dishwashing machine, the dishes themselves moved. Maybe I misunderstand it. I don't know. I wasn't alive then. So another invention, the automobile. We've heard, everyone knows about automobiles, and it was done by Henry Ford. The most popular, he didn't invent the automobile. Let me clarify that, ladies and gentlemen. Henry Ford made the automobile mass produced and reasonably inexpensive and available to all people. So he wasn't the first one to come up with the idea of a car, but he was the first one to make it so that everybody could have one. And so what he came up with was this car called a Model T. And I want to tell you a little bit about Henry Ford because he worked for Edison's company, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, and what Edison did with his company. So he started out there. I love quotes, so I threw in one of his quotes. He vowed to build a car large enough for the family, but small enough for the individual to run. That was so low in price that no man making a good salary would be unable to own one. I see a typo in that. I need to fix that. By the year 1918, half of all cars sold in the United States were Ford Model Ts. So kind of the first to make it super popular and super mainstream. Almost kind of like we might say Steve Jobs was like that with cellular internet connected phones, with the iPhone kind of being one of the first connected phones. Now there's other kinds. You can get a Samsung, Galaxy, you get all different kinds. But I think when historians look back at our period, they'll say that Steve Jobs and his iPhone were kind of like Henry Ford in his Model T. Another invention that happened at in this period of time was the flying machine. The Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, you guys have all probably studied and heard about all of this, but we have these brothers here. I keep moving myself around. Orville and Wilbur Wright. In Washington, D.C., there's a museum called the National Air and Space Museum that has a full-size replica of this first airplane in there. So tell you a little bit about these brothers. When they were young, they were super encouraged to explore the world around them. Their quote, I love throwing in quotes, was, "We were lucky enough to grow up in an environment where there was always much encouragement to pursue intellectual interests." They were encouraged by their family to explore what interested them. Now, I think of you guys, you being homeschooled and attending classes at FLA, I was thinking, oh my gosh, these students are a lot like the Wright brothers, because your parents often will put you in a class at FLA that you're interested in. I think of Sam, and he is a science guy through and through, and he's taken every class Mrs. Hindmarsh has ever taught because he's super interested in science. I have a couple of you who like social studies, and so you'll take history classes. I have seen some of you who are excellent writers, and you're in Mrs. Frederick's write-on class and in her journalism class, writing for the newspaper, and you're doing her novel study, reading about books and learning because you're really, really good at language arts. So it's super cool to see you guys being encouraged the same way that the Wright brothers were encouraged. So I'm excited to see what you guys end up doing. These guys, they looked specifically at a buzzard to learn how the bird flew so that they could learn a lot from them. They actually read a lot of books that had previous designs and previous ideas about flying. Turns out most of it was wrong. If you've taken my let's see, what class is it? History in the Middle Ages class. We studied Leonardo da Vinci and we saw some of his flying machines and some of his drawings. Turns out most of them wouldn't actually work. The Wright brothers read a lot about what other people had thought of and tried a lot of their things and discovered that didn't work. So they had to learn on their own from trial and error, but they did spend a lot of time reading and seeing what other people had thought. That airplane at Kitty Hawk was called the Wright Flyer. It actually flew for a total of 12 seconds, and that was pretty amazing. It wasn't much longer after that. The next long flight was like an hour and, I want to say like an hour and 15 minutes or something like that. It was over an hour. So that gives you just a little peek into these brothers. This is a photograph of them. This period of history is kind of cool because we have photographs for the first time. So another great invention, now I'm hopefully starting to hit one that maybe you guys hadn't heard so much about. Maybe you hadn't heard about the washing machine, the dishwasher for dishes, but you may not have heard about Levi Strauss, but you definitely know about Levi Strauss because he is the guy who came up with blue jeans. Now, of course, there were pants and they were made out of denim, but he made pants sturdy for the first time. And this is actually a photograph of a pair of Levi Strauss blue jeans that are over 100 years old. And Levi came to California as a young guy. He was an immigrant from another country. Can't remember off the top of my head what country he was from. But he came to California, like many, hoping to make his fortune in the gold rush, but he did not pound for gold. We talked about this in my California history class. We might have mentioned it in US history too, that a lot of the people, most of the people, in fact, who got rich at all from the gold rush were the people that were merchants. They were people that were entrepreneurs, basically, and opened up stores to sell supplies to the miners. And so that's what Levi Strauss did. And he realized that right away the miners were coming in regularly buying new pants, particularly overalls. He sold them a lot of overalls because their pants were wearing out. They were tearing apart at the seams. And so he came up with a new and a better way to make jeans. He used these things right here. These are called copper rivets. And he put them where seams came together to make them stronger. They were patented, meaning that nobody else could make them for a period of time. And this gave birth to what we call blue jeans today, where they're dyed indigo with that blue color. That's why they're called indigo blue. Another invention, the light bulb. This is actually the patent that was submitted. There's the number on it in 1890 for Thomas Edison's light bulb. Now, real quick, what a patent is you're able to register a unique design with the federal government so that no one else can copy that specific exact design for a period of time. It's not patented forever. There's a limited time on it. But the idea is if you've put a lot of time and research and energy into designing something and you finally got it to work, you should be able to sell it and make a profit on all that time and energy and money you invested in making it before anybody else can copy it. We have that with prescription drugs. No one else can make the same drug that is patented for a period of time before it can then be produced by other people. And the idea is that someone invested a lot of time and energy into it, that they should reap a reward for that. So let's talk real quick about the light bulb and Thomas Edison here. So Thomas Edison, he was quite a character. As a young kid, he was super mischievous. He got into a lot of trouble at school, and I had read that he was even asked by his teachers to leave school, and thus he was an original homeschooler. He was taught at home by his mom. He was an avid reader. He was encouraged. Again, I'm seeing a lot of these inventors were super encouraged by their families, and a lot of these were homeschooled. So it makes me think of you guys who have such wonderful parents too. When he was 21 years old, Tom invented a stock ticker. It's a way to kind of track the prices on stocks. Stocks, remember, are what are people buying into a corporation, and you can buy and sell your interest in a corporation on what's called the stock exchange. And this was a way to see what the stocks were selling for, if they went up or down. Anyways, he made $40,000 on this invention, which was a pile of money. I don't know what it'd be equivalent to now. I could probably look it up on my phone in what's called constant dollars. That means the value of the money today, but I'm guessing it'd be like, I don't know, say you got like $1 million or something. Might not be that quite that much, but it was definitely a lot of money. And he was able to then start a kind of like, well, I've said factory, but it's kind of like a design studio where he could hire assistants to help him with all of these inventions and these ideas and to test things out. And this guy, Thomas Edison, he was like a workaholic. He was crazy. He would work like 20 hours a day. He worked nonstop. At one time, he tested when he was working on his light bulb, guys, the filament is the part that's inside that actually kind of lights up. I'm looking for a light bulb around here. I have like on my ceiling, those are not normal light bulbs. Maybe I have a light bulb here. You can't see it. I have a light on my desk, but you can't see the bulb in it. But the filament is the inside that kind of glows, that lights up. And he had seen it, that it was he had this idea that he could light the filament and it would work, but he had to test all different kinds to get it just right. They tested 1,600 until they found the one that would work. Talk about someone who didn't give up. He worked nonstop. And with this factory, this invention factory, I guess we could call it, actually ended up patenting over 1,000 different inventions. So the quote that I found for him that I thought was super cool was that genius, because we look at these guys, we look at Thomas Edison and we look at Eli Whitney and we look at Steve Jobs and we look at these guys and we're like, they're just brilliant. His quote was, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Now, I would ask you, what do you think that means, you guys? That means it's hard work. It's not just he didn't get lucky, and he wasn't just smart. He worked hard. He perspired. It came from his hard work and his dedication. So I love that. And I wanted to throw in these quotes because these quotes would be what we call primary sources. People recording what happened when it happened. They're words out of these people's mouths. Next guy, we have Alexander Graham Bell. He's the guy who comes up with the telephone. And it was interesting learning a little bit about his background. His mom was deaf, so as a boy, he was super interested in sound and how sound moved. And I would imagine that was because his mother couldn't hear. So he loved experimenting with sound. And again, like all our other entrepreneurs, all our other inventors, he was encouraged to do that. When he became older, as a young adult, he had a job as a teacher. He taught the deaf. And at night, he worked with sound. Particularly, he worked with telegraphs. So he was working hard trying to improve the telegraph and come up with a better method and a better way to make the telegraph work. And this work with the telegraph led to other discoveries of how sound would transfer along wires. He had an assistant, Mr. Watson, and he had him, and he saw when they were working with wires that sound was moving on it and could hear output on the other side. So he did some additional work with him and was ultimately able to make the phone call to his assistant where he said, "Hey, come in here. I need you in the other room." Those were like the first words across the telephone. He then shared the telephone with other people and promoted his development and stuff like that. But then ultimately, interestingly enough, he went back later in his life and devoted all of his attention to improving life for the hearing impaired, for working with the deaf. So I bet he would like Mrs. Layton, because Mrs. Layton, she can do American Sign Language. And so they would probably have lots in common. So the quote that I have from him is another one that I just loved. It said, "Always listen to children. They might have ideas we've never heard of." And I thought that was really cool, because when I teach, one of the things I love to do is ask you guys what you think about stuff, because I'm learning so much from you guys that I love to hear what you guys have to say. Last guy we have here, I'm too big. Let's make Mrs. Chappie teeny. There we go. I can come right down there and look small. Is George Washington Carver. Now, so this is one of the reasons I put him on here, is this is a super great bridge from the Civil War to this rise of industry period in around the 1900s, where we move into what we call the modern era of history. So that's where this class ends. George Washington Carver was born a slave near the end of the Civil War. After the Civil War, obviously, he was a freedman, and he became a professor, a teacher. Because he had grown up on a plantation, he knew a lot about plants and about crops and about growing things. So when he became a professor, he taught at a school that was primarily used for educating African Americans. And we talked last week about how a lot of African Americans who were former slaves were freed and then became planters themselves. And there were problems with that sharecropping. We talked about sharecropping last week. But these former slaves were planting crops. Now, one of the things that happened, and you guys know about this because you've had lots of science, is that when you plant a crop over and over and over in the same soil, what happens to that soil, guys? You know, the soil wears out, that it's important to rotate your crops. Now, George Washington Carver, as this scientist teaching about crops and teaching about the importance of crop rotation and knowing that crops will wear out the soil, discovered that certain crops were a lot better for soil than other crops. Sweet potatoes was something that was better for soil. Particularly, peanuts were better for soil. Now, he wanted to help these African Americans grow crops that could make money, and the crops that made money wore out the soil. Peanuts were better for the soil, but no one really wanted peanuts. What are peanuts good for? So he goes into his lab. Talk about an entrepreneur. Talk about a guy coming up with ideas. He comes up with ideas to things he can do with peanuts in the lab. So what do you think is his biggest and best invention with peanuts? Michael Szigeti, what is his biggest and best invention? Peanut butter. So he comes up with, are you ready for this? 325 things to do with a peanut. Think of what you can create with an education. He comes up with this. He comes up with, this is a whole list of the short list, not all 325 things, but things that you can do with peanuts. He had clothes dye. He had Meat substitute. Peanut brittle, personal favorite. That's a good one. He came up with different types of sauces, chocolate coated peanuts. Now that's a good one. Baby massage cream, soaps, cosmetics, all kinds of stuff that this guy came up with. Kind of amazing if you think about it. So this is just to give you guys a kind of a bird's eye view, an overview of this period of history, some of the amazing inventions that were coming about during this time. And then this is where this US history class would end. The next US history class is modern American history, and that takes you through World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam Wars. I haven't taught that class in several years. Maybe we should bring that back. That would be kind of fun to do for a little while. So that's it, guys. I can't believe we're done with US history now. I'm sad that the class is over. I'm grateful that you guys stuck with it, and some of you have been watching these videos. More of you have been coming to our Zooms. I'm really, really glad that we were able to finish the class together. We've accomplished something pretty amazing. Historians will look back and talk about you guys and what you did during the COVID-19 pandemic when the world stopped and everyone stayed home. So I look forward to the time when we're not at home. Well, I will get to see you. We're going to plan a park day together as soon as we get past this, as soon as the government tells us literally you can be together in groups of more than 10. Right now, the maximum that you can have at any one place for any one purpose is 10, and you need to be 6 feet apart. So obviously we can't go to a park, plus the parks are closed. So that's a whole other story. But as soon as we can, we will get together, and I will look forward to seeing you there. So take care, stay safe. I will look forward to seeing you guys soon at our park day, and then again, hopefully next fall when you are back for some more History Rocks with Mrs. Chappie. Bye, guys.